Hello everyone, we're back again this week with the Gospel Geek. Today we're going to deal with the question of what exactly does it mean for us to be human? And to me, those who are created by God, it's a question that we often ask ourselves in different ways, like who am I, or what is the point of my being here? It's a question that we're not unfamiliar with, especially for geeks. The opening lines of the older Spider-Man movies starring Tobey Maguire begins with the question, who am I? And this is a question and an issue that many superheroes or supernatural beings, people who seem to be in some ways other than human, often wrestle with. You'll see a character lose their superpowers and they'll wonder, who can I be without these abilities? And then typically their non-super friends will tell them that they are special, not because of their super abilities, but because of who they are. And then they get their superpowers back anyway, and everything turns out okay. It's a question that we want to figure out. What does it mean for us to be human beings? Especially if we agree that human beings are the people of God. It's easy to find ourselves thinking about how we are created as individual beings. I am different than each and every single one of you. And we are all different from then various other people who are in our lives. And that is certainly true. But perhaps we forget to remember that our difference comes in the form of being distinct from one another, not in being separated from one another. When we get caught up in thinking about ourselves as just several individuals, I think we lose sight of the story that God paints in the scriptures. A story of the community of Israel and the community that is the church. God made us to be with one another. In the very beginning, he placed us in a garden with all the animals and creatures and set us out to name and to take care of them. So the people of God, us as human beings, are not separated individual pieces. But we are a community that is to be brought together. We spend much of our time trying to just define who we are, to decide this is who I am, and to do that we say, like, I am this to this person and that to that person. We're trying to come up with all of these ways to figure out who we are. That Spider-Man movie concludes with Peter Parker saying, who am I? I am Spider-Man. We have these people who try to get all the different pieces of themselves to define who they are. And so we get other images like Tony Stark standing in front of a press conference saying, you know what the truth is? I am Iron Man. And each individual aspect of our personality, of who we are, the way we relate to people, we try to piece it together in a way to search for who we are. But what if being the people of God, there is something more to us than that? What if it's not just about how does who I am and how I affect this person define me? But what if who we are is brought to the forefront by how we connect and communicate and interact with one another? The scripture has a story, a drama, a sort of play in which there aren't just individuals who have their identity on the basis of individual personality traits, but the characters, much like characters in our plays and movies and books, are brought out by what they do, how they communicate and connect with other people. Kind of like actors on a stage. William Shakespeare has a famous line, "All the world is a stage and all of us are merely players." However, I would venture to say there is nothing mere about being a player. Rather, it is in this dynamic and relational way in which we interact and connect to one another through our speaking and our doing, through the communities that we find ourselves a part of, that makes humanity. That God has created a people of dynamic relatedness, a people who are meant to be in relationship and community with one another. People who aren't just simply watching history unfold, who are not simply just trying to figure out who they are by searching their interior selves, but people who bear forth who they are as they act and speak on stage, and how they find their place in the grand story that is unfolding in the world that God has created. God is moving and active, and He created us to also be active and moving. So what does that mean for us? I think we would begin to see churches that are a lot less about seeing one individual and another achieve some kind of personal victory, though those are not unimportant. But our churches would be communities and be about communities that together join in seeing the whole of who we are redeemed in God's good creation. That in trying to understand who we are, it wouldn't be so much about finding ourselves, about finding our place in God's calling, but what it means to respond when God says, "Who will go for me?" And that looks different. God's "who will go" looks different for every person. But our response and our ability, our choosing to be able to respond and answer God, that dramatic participation, not just idle observation, is what sets apart this story from all other stories. Who are we? We are people who are able to dramatically and excitingly participate in the world that God has created, even as God has created us. Thank you again for joining us for another week of the Gospel Geek. I'm going to go find myself a Bacta tank to maybe take a soak in. My prayer for you, though, for this week is that you would continue to grow in relationship with all those who are around you and find new and exciting ways to participate in the story that God is working in this world. May the mercies and blessings of God follow you throughout the rest of this week.